Okay, just to explain about my job title a little bit, I always used to say I was an editor, and I live in New York City where everyone then asked me what magazine I edit at. So I sort of had to amend that, and I'm a video editor now. And also an editor, at least in the production sense, used to be a guy that sat at a keyboard and there was a producer who sat behind him and told him exactly what to do. In this day and age, I make most of those decisions myself, so I've sort of complimented myself by adding producer to the title as well. And I also want to say that I sort of had anxiety before this because I don't really think of myself necessarily as an entrepreneur, since I don't really have my own business except for being self-employed and working on my own projects, or working on other people's projects, but working independently and bouncing from project to project. So I felt very good to hear both Jerry Greenfield and Michael Alexson say that they don't consider themselves entrepreneurs either. So at any rate, I'd never had a grand plan for getting where I got to, but I made a lot of great mistakes along the way that hopefully you can learn from, as did I. My first plan when I graduated from college is I knew I wanted to do production. So my thought was, I'm going to graduate from college, I'm going to sell out. I'm going to work for a big, fat corporation and make lots of cash. And then with that cash, I'm going to be able to actually pay for film school. And now is probably what happened with Carl. The dot-com bubble burst, and I was laid off from the, not actually a corporation, but a partnership that I worked for. And I was sort of without a plan and without the fabled cash that you're supposed to make from selling out. As luck would have it, a friend of mine was working at Oxygen Media at the time, the cable channel that's started by Geraldine Laybourne and Oprah Winfrey, and I was, I needed to pay my rent, and she says, well, do you want to come in and transcribe tapes? So I came in, and I was just transcribing interviews, the most unglamorous and uncreative aspect of video production there is, but it's a foot in the door. It's how I got in. I started as a PA, and I worked my way up to logging and digitizing, and eventually roughing stuff out, to being an associate editor and a post-production supervisor, which is someone who basically oversees the functional aspects of the editing process while I was at Oxygen. Hang on, one point I wanted to make. We didn't have, when I was here, the cinema studies program was just a minor you could do through the theater department, and so we really didn't have great facilities for learning the technical aspects of what I do. But the great thing about Oberlin, and I would imagine most liberal arts colleges for that matter, though I'm impartial to Oberlin, or partial to Oberlin, is it gives you the critical thinking abilities to be able to pick up new technologies and skills amazingly quickly, faster than I would estimate most of the rest of the workforce, which has been a great help for me. Like, I didn't know how to do anything in terms of editing when I started at Oxygen, and I was able to pick up stuff really quickly just because of those critical thinking abilities that you pick up while at Oberlin. In 2005, I got a call from a woman and I'm glad that the title of this one, by the way, is Exploring Connections, since Connections is basically the name of my business, of contacts and who you know, that sort of thing. I got a call from a woman that I used to work with at Oxygen who wanted me to come work at MTVU, which is MTV's college channel. And specifically she was working on a project at the time. They were doing a whole campaign of MTVU about raising awareness of the crisis going on in Darfur, which I brought onto that. We won an Emmy for sort of an honorary Emmy for the project. I got to cut a number of pieces on that. It was great. It was thrilling. And my other Oberlin note is that I think you'll find, this is more directed to the students right now, as you get into the real world, you may languish in projects that you're sort of working at, but you'll come across projects like the Darfur project for me that sort of, they speak to your social conscience that you've either picked up before Oberlin, or the reason you came to Oberlin, or you picked up while at Oberlin, that's probably where you're really going to thrive, and I just encourage you to look for those projects. So while I was at MTV, I sort of developed into a stable routine. I had my own edit suite, my own office for the only time in my life. I became the staff editor while I was there. It was nice. I got to basically sort of, not all the time, but pick have my pick of the projects that came through. Like if there's a certain celebrity we were working with, or like a music video we were cutting, I would oftentimes get dibs on it just because I had seniority. And I was psyched because I'm, as most of you probably are, sort of a pop music junkie, and great music-related content. At MTV, at least back then, they used to have a great independent music slant since they were a college-oriented channel. The pitfall of this is that stability can fall into routine, as it did for me. And a lot of the work that I did, and I moved from MTV around to MTVU, to some things at MTV, sometimes at MTV2, but the music stuff, it became a little redundant. And after you've cut, 20 different pieces on bands, they start to all feel the same, and it starts to feel like you're doing the same thing. And I began to feel really uncreative, like I was tapped out and I really had nothing else to offer. So the solution that I came up with as of last year is to go freelance and to work independently, which is what I do now, which offers you a great variety of projects. I've worked on everything in the past year, from like a reality TV series to a series of promos for independent music to instructional videos on the internet to what have you, a wide variety of stuff. It appeals to me in part because working on a project basis as opposed to a 9-to-5 job, I have time to pitch my own stuff and pursue my own ideas. I'm currently have sort of a pitch on hold with Current, the network started with Al Gore right now, that I don't really want to go into too much detail about since it's all up in the air. But that's sort of like, I wouldn't have had time for that while I was stuck at MTV. And the other part that appeals to me is that I am just not a 9-to-5 person. I don't like punching the clock and leaving a certain hour. I was working on a show last spring where we were regularly working like 12 to 14-hour days and just sort of killing ourselves to get the show cut. But I loved it because we're working the whole time. It's you're clocking in and clocking out based on the amount of work that has to be done, not based on the fact that you need to be in a chair for that amount of time. Some of the pitfalls I just want to go over if you're thinking of becoming an independent worker. Be aware to budget carefully. The first freelance thing I ever did was through a website that worked peripherally with a show I was working on at Oxygen, where I just overheard the people from the website saying how they wanted some work to be done to my boss, the executive producer of the show. And I thought, I kind of know how to do that stuff. I think I could do that. So I went to him and I said, with your blessing, I would like to just take that work on myself. I know we have enough work to do here, and I'll just do it as a freelance thing. And that was my first freelance gig. I ended up, the end of it, based on what I had budgeted and what I had promised to them, not having done this ever before, I ended up working for about 48 hours straight and going, several $100s out of my own pocket over the budget. So live and learn. That was my first bad experience, but thankfully it's really the only one. The other pitfall is sometimes you got to pay rent. It's not all glamorous. Case in point, at the end of the month, I'm cutting some internal video for some corporate law firm in Manhattan that I guarantee you is going to be really boring and really not exciting, but you got to pay the bills in order to do the things that you really enjoy doing. And then a pitfall is that when you work alone or you are the contact producer point and you have other people working for you, just be aware that the failure of the project resides solely on you and there's really no passing the buck anymore. Likewise, if it's a tremendous success, you get to reap all the rewards. And just the last point I want to make about what sort of keeps me going now is that I currently, for the past year, I teach at a place called Downtown Community Television in New York City, which is a nonprofit production center. I teach editing and sometimes color correction classes there, but it's a great way to to connect with people and to pass on your skills to other people, but it's also a great way to remind yourself about those aspects of your job that are actually really important. I have been following lesson plans and telling students to do things, and then I suddenly realized, you know what, this isn't important. I don't actually use this, and it reminds me that I don't need to do all those other extemporaneous things either. and just sort of keeps you connected to what's important. And I think I picked that up through Oberlin of actually through Exco's of not just being a student and learning all the time. And I do have to learn all the time. I constantly have to pick up new skills and techniques and things like that. But it's also important to pass on what you learn. There's no monopoly on knowledge, and keep it going. And I would encourage you to teach no matter what you do.